My voyage of sexual discovery. The Narcissist boasts. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. One aspect of my work is to help you recognize when narcissists present in situations where people don't otherwise realize this is the behavior of a narcissist. I regularly explain to people that the first time that people are ensnared by a narcissist, they never, ever see it. They don't. They may not have even heard about narcissism, or even if they have, they tend to have a rather limited understanding of what it is, and they fail to recognize it in the person that is a narcissist that has ensnared them. Often this is in a romantic relationship, but it could be as a consequence of a familiar ensnarement, friendship, workplace, a provider of a service. There's lots of different arenas in which the narcissist appears. Often, the narcissist is able to act with impunity because people don't call out the behavior for what it actually is. And often, it's dressed up as other behaviors, naturally by the unaware narcissists themselves, but by other people talking about that person's behaviors. Invariably, what happens is that they think the behavior is either harmless or as a consequence of something else, and lots of euphemistic labels are utilized which trivialize what is actually going on. And part of my work is exposing the instances of this behavior, demonstrating where the wrong language is being used to describe the behavior of that person, to allow people to spot, yes, this is the behavior of a narcissist, so they can see it in similar occasions. And as I'm about to unpack an article in the Telegraph, this has been provided in relation to relationships, dating advice, parenthood, marriage and sexual consent with regard to the relevant topics, and completely misses what's really going on here. The article explains, sitting at the kitchen table, I show my husband, Federico, not his real name, my latest match on the dating app Field, asking for his feedback. I know his advice will be given with my best interests at heart. Note immediately the central conceit of the narcissist. He is going to do something that I want. He has my best interests at heart. The world revolves around me. I'm special. He's bound to comment and do so in a supportive manner. We've helped each other with romantic advice ever since we opened up our relationship 4 years ago. A decision driven by my desire to experiment sexually. Accordingly, this woman who's married decides that they should open up their relationship, her decision, driven by her desire to experiment sexually. Rather than end the relationship and go off and ride as many dicks as she wants, instead, she wants to do the typical thing of the narcissist, have her cake and eat it. Maintain a relationship over this man whilst being able to go around and sleep with other people. She explains, he's been my constant support. Nothing about her supporting him, notice, as I've experimented with everything from group sex to kink and tantric sex. We are separated, but he lives with me and our children half the time, and with his new partner of 3 years, Katie, not her real name, the rest of the time. So this lady has an arrangement whereby she's able to rely upon the support of her former husband by living with him part of the time, even though he's in a relationship with somebody else. That she commandeers his time, even though he's meant to be having a relationship with someone else. She talks about her sexual behaviour to her former husband, invites his input. Now, of course, he's free not to go along with this arrangement, but there may be, and we don't hear, of course, his side of the story, cogent reasons, at least in his mind, as to why he endures this relationship. She explains, no one goes into marriage imagining it will end like this, but I have no regrets. The absence of remorse for this unusual setup. It's a far cry from my previous life. I quashed my sexuality throughout my formative years. I was brought up in a Catholic household where we went to church every Sunday. I was brought up to be a good girl, encouraged to dress modestly and not have sex outside a living relationship. The only time it was mentioned in our house was with warnings not to get pregnant. It was so ingrained in me that I judged women who had sex for pleasure and one-night stands. Blame shifting. I met Federico in September 2006 when I was aged 25 while working in the same sales company in Rome, transgression of professional work boundary. At that point, I'd had sex with 5 men, all of them as part of a committed relationship. I'd enjoyed it, but couldn't really let go of my inhibitions and feel confident sexually. Federico proposed in 2009, and in 2011 we got married in Lake Garda, where we were living. It was a magical day, a church wedding, followed by a beautiful party. There were around 130 people there. As we feasted on a 7-course meal and danced into the early hours, I could feel my family's joy. I'd got married in Italy to an Italian man, fulfilling everyone's expectations of what happens if you're a good girl. We had our first child in 2014 and moved back to the UK later that year for Federico's work in IT, and because I wanted to be nearer to my family. I built up a friendship network and we were happy. It was during my second pregnancy in 2017 that I started to struggle. I was told my baby was likely to have a chromosomal abnormality. The potential diagnosis sent me into a spiral of anxiety. In the end, my baby was fine, but those traumatic weeks of uncertainty affected me. Blame shifting. I was a stay-at-home mum, and Federico travelled a lot for work. When he was at home, he was supportive, but during his absences, I was lonely. I became very anxious. I even stopped driving because it terrified me. I knew something had to change. Well, it might be perhaps talk to your husband about the fact of how you are missing him and that you feel lonely, and look at perhaps changing things so that he can be around a bit more, or if that's not possible, looking at ways that you could feel supported from other people within the context of family and friends. But no. This lady found out about an all-female retreat in January 2020. It was in Morocco, and she decided to go. It's a measure of my mental health, then, that I called the organiser constantly in the run-up to my departure, asking about everything from fire exits to what happened if I lost my passport. Or in other words, not recognising boundaries, repeatedly pestering an individual, calling it mental health when actually you're behaving in an entitled fashion, and repeatedly asserting control. The retreat was life-changing. It helped me to get rid of the trauma from my second pregnancy. But also, it helped me realise that I was a people-pleaser. I learnt that it was healthy to say no and put in boundaries. Above all, I was encouraged to take control of my life and be who I wanted to be. I didn't have to conform. There were 14 women there. We laughed, we cried, we meditated, and by the time I came home, I felt lighter. I was ready to tackle the rest of my life. I decided to do a sex, love, and relationship coaching course. Yes, because that's the most natural thing that you would do, isn't it? I read and researched extensively around the subject and concluded that a fear of judgment had caused me to repress some of my sexual desires, which I now wanted to explore. Or in other words, I found an excuse to enable me to go and do what I'd always wanted to do, which was have my cake and eat it. My love life with Federico was fine. It followed a well-trodden path, all over each other at the beginning, waning as we got used to each other, and fading when the children came, combined with the pressures of Federico travelling for his work and my anxiety. Again, blaming Federico. I wanted more. Notice, rather than understanding that this is a pattern that affects many couples and deciding how might you work on it together, she decides that she wants to open up our marriage. This is what she tells Federico in January 2021 after she started training to be a coach. People think it must be a terrifying conversation to have, but we've always been very open and honest. Well, that's what she tells us. I dare say Federico will probably tell us something different. I knew it would end up in a discussion, not an argument. He's very comfortable in his skin, so didn't feel insecure or lacking. He realised it was about me. Well, it absolutely is the case, isn't it? Because everything's about you. Over the next few months, we talked about potential concerns, such as jealousy, dating separately, or having group sex, and what we felt comfortable with. In the end, it was him who made the first move, signing up to Field in August 2021. We would look at it together while he chose his potential dates. It was liberating. When he came home from dates, I never asked him for specific details and never experienced jealousy, more curiosity. I resisted signing up, as I wanted to explore meeting someone in a bar. I had an image of finding a handsome stranger and going back to their house to have a one-night stand. I wanted to be the naughty teenager I'd never been. It transpires that these days it's hard to meet someone in real life. So in November, I joined Field too. Or in other words, you tried to pull, but you failed. So you had to utilise the predatory hunting ground of an app. My first date was a disaster. The man was unpleasant. My second one in December led me to popping my non-monogamy cherry. It was normal, clumsy first-time sex which led to friendship. Throughout this time, Federico and I were still together. In January 2022, we went to a play party, where like-minded people get together. He told me he was interested in a woman there, and I invited her over and gave her a massage. Then, with her consent, I invited Federico to join us before leaving them to it. That was my realization that although I was comfortable watching him, I didn't want to do anything with him watching me. I was worried he'd be upset if he witnessed me experiencing pleasure. Oh, such a martyr. From there, my experimenting continued. I went to sex parties and kink events and had a threesome with another couple. They approached me, and it was a huge turn-on to have that validation, or in other words, fuel, and the underlying control, and I enjoyed the sex. I learnt about tantric sex. I experimented with light bondage, and I made the first move with a man, inviting him to a friend's house in London and having sex with him. That was very liberating. In all, I've slept with 9 men and 1 woman, always using protection, and every encounter has been fulfilling in a different way. In July 2022, I met Will, not his real name, through Field. By September, I realised I was falling in love and confided in Federico. By then, he'd met Katie, 39, and had strong feelings for her. We realised our marriage had come to the end of the line. Again, we get her telling us all of this, but Federico's side of the story could be completely different. I wasn't sad. We weren't wrong to get married. It was a wonderful relationship. But now we wanted other things. Paramount in our conversations was the stability of our children, so we decided to stay living together in our house near Southport, Merseyside. For more than 6 months we stayed sharing the marital bed, although we never had sex, and then he moved into the spare room. We split the childcare 50-50. Out of respect, we don't bring lovers home while the other is there, and it's only Will who's ever stayed over, once our relationship was established as a long-term one. I'd never bring anything casual into the family home. So accordingly, we don't bring lovers home, but Will could stay over. Although my desire to open our marriage started for sexual reasons, I now realise it was also because I'd abandoned who I was to please Federico. In other words, Federico, it's your fault. It's always your fault. I had been abandoning who I was because I needed to please you. We were quite different. While he loves classical concerts, I like gigs. He likes walking. I like dancing. I'm spiritual and he's very science-based. In other words, this is a revision of history, whereby, with Federico now being painted black, she points out all of the differences. I know that when I fell in love with him, I changed. I dressed differently and was always ready to go along with what he wanted to do, rather than following my preferences. It wasn't his fault, it was my conditioning to please. This is clearly an individual that has been told that she has been conditioned to please, when in actual fact, it's the other way around, that she needs people to do what she wants in order for her to gain that sense of underlying control. I split up with Will in December last year. Oh, what a surprise, a failed relationship. It didn't work out. Federico continues to live in the family home when it's his time with the children. If I'm at home, we'll sit and have supper together, and we go on days out and walks together. We're close and our children have adapted brilliantly. I've met Katie, this is Federico's partner, who's lovely, but we haven't forced a friendship. It might grow, we'll see. Now, I'm happily single. I've learnt a lot about myself. I can see myself having group sex again. I enjoy light bondage and tantric sex, but for me it's very intense, so I'll reserve that for the next time I'm in a relationship. I love my work as a sex and relationship coach. I bet you do. Being prescriptive to people is about how they ought to behave, which of course is an assertion of control. My current profile states I want a man who puts a woman's pleasure as a priority and is a good cook. I love the fact I've learned to be honest rather than trying to guess what a man is looking for. My needs might change and then I'll edit my profile. What I've learned more than anything is that life evolves and you never know where it might lead you. Well, we don't get the full detail about what Federico explains in relation to all of this, although there is a small part where he states, when Carla mentioned opening up the relationship, it wasn't something I'd ever considered, but we started talking about it and I ended up agreeing we should try it. We took it step by step, having long conversations, and I realised there were options that were opening up to me. I don't know whether we'd still be married if we hadn't gone down this route. I suspect we were unhappier than we realised, but not ready to end anything. My new partner is completely happy with the situation. I just feel lucky to have such a good co-parenting relationship with Carla and that we're both happy on our different paths. It strikes me as a rather kind of statement which is, I don't want to really rock the boat in respect of what's gone on. I have children. If you want me to comment, this is all I'm going to say about it. I suspect that privately he will have a lot more to say about it. Now, what you have, of course, is an individual that deems that it's appropriate to take to a national newspaper to talk all about her life, her sexual voyage of discovery, and how basically she ripped her family apart, but then kind of kept it together again. The fact that she feels that it's appropriate to share all of this, and of course, she will believe in her own mind that it is entirely appropriate. But the fact is that all it's doing is giving her a platform for her to boast about what she's done and allow her to brag about the things that she has engaged in. The fact is, the children didn't ask for this, and whilst they're not identified by name, her picture appears in the article, and which means that quite possibly someone will recognise her and then go, that's your mum, isn't it? And of course, it's the self-absorbed nature of this particular individual that causes her to want to talk about all of her adventures and how it was all done and how I've discovered myself. It's actually not that particularly interesting in itself. All it is her advertising her services and her life disguised as some kind of story without any real consideration for Federico, and particularly not showing any consideration whatsoever at all for the children. And the fact is that the comments, and there are over 1,000 of them, are all critical of this woman in relation to the necessity of having to share the story, the lack of concern for the children, the fact that it's not an article that should actually be in the Daily Telegraph, that it is a boring article, that it's just smut being peddled and basically regarding as sickening and vulgar. One person writes, as a happily married mum of 3 who is no prude by any means, this article truly is one of the worst and despicable things I've ever read. The thought that this woman is a mother of 2 children who have to read this one day is sickening indeed. Doesn't think about that because that's a collateral consequence. I don't care what people choose to get up to post-divorce, but don't broadcast it like this. It's revolting. I feel desperately sorry for the children. If this were my mother, I would be heartbroken. The sad thing is, this woman clearly has no care or concern for her own children. I genuinely think behaving like this and broadcasting such activities in public is bordering on neglect. Indeed. And it shows the self-absorbed nature of this woman, her lack of emotional empathy for those affected by her children, and it's a supposedly liberating tale, but it's a simply life is all about me worldview. And it demonstrates the narcissistic behaviour of this individual, the need to blame other people, that it was her upbringing that caused her to be repressed, when in actual fact it was something else with regard to the issue of control, but she doesn't recognise it. And the fact is that it's the lie of sexual liberation, when in actual fact it demonstrates a morally bankrupt individual who needs to make it all about her and feels the necessity of sharing her tale without due regard for anybody else that it affects. Once again, the boasts of a narcissist, under the auspices of it being some kind of voyage of sexual discovery. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.